On Thursday, before the death of the Queen interrupted politics as usual, Liz Truss announced her plans to deal with the energy price crisis. Here she is speaking in the House of Commons.
Earlier this week, I promised I would deal with the soaring energy prices faced by families and businesses across the UK. And today I am delivering on that promise. This government is moving immediately to introduce a new energy price guarantee that will give people certainty on energy bills. It will curb inflation and boost growth. This guarantee, which includes a temporary suspension of green levies, means that from the 1st of October, a typical household will pay no more than £2,500 per year for each of the next 2 years while we get the energy market back on track.
The energy cap is currently set at around £2,000 per year, but was set to rise to £3,600 on the 1st of October. But under Truss's plan, it'll only go up to £2,500 per year in October. And it will be frozen at that level until 2024. In addition, the £400 payment announced earlier in the year will remain, meaning bills will only be slightly higher than they are now. Though that is still 50% higher than they were at the beginning of this year. Many people already in energy poverty. Truss's package also had support for businesses and the public sector, which don't have a cap on their energy bills.
We will also support all businesses, charities and public sector organisations with their energy costs this winter, offering an equivalent guarantee for 6 months. After those 6 months, we will provide further support to vulnerable sectors such as hospitality, including our local pubs.
The government hasn't yet provided details of how much the plan will cost, but estimates are putting it at around £150 billion. That's a huge state intervention, more than twice the cost of the furlough scheme. Ultimately, most of that money will go directly into the pockets of the big energy giants. That's because the cash will be used to pay energy retailers. The difference between the wholesale price of energy and the £2,500 we'll see on our bills, or on a typical bill. And the retailers will hand that money over to the energy giants when they buy the fuel. So Shell and BP will continue to rake it in, just because the Russian invasion of Ukraine, along with some other factors, drove up the price of gas. Energy firms are forecast to make up to £170 billion in unexpected profits off the back of this crisis, but Truss does not want to tax them.
We will be bringing forward emergency legislation to deliver this policy. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, will set out the expected costs as part of his fiscal statement later this month. And I can tell the House today that we will not be giving in to the leader of the opposition who calls for this to be funded through a windfall tax. That would undermine the national interest by discouraging the very investment we need to secure homegrown energy supplies.
So why might Liz Truss be shielding the energy giants? She says it's because she doesn't want to discourage investment, but there's no evidence that taxing the unexpected and unearned profits of the giants will make other industries wary of investing in the UK, which makes me suspect something else might be going on. Information released just before her announcement might give a clue. These are the names of the donors who had given a total of £425,000 to her leadership bid. That's a hefty sum of money for an internal election. And one name in particular stands out, Fritriana Hay. She gifted Truss £100,000. Her husband, James Hay, is a former senior executive for, you guessed it, energy giant BP. Of course, James Hay isn't the only person who used to work for an energy giant. Truss herself worked for Shell for 4 years. As Zara Sultana put it, when Liz Truss rejects a windfall tax on the £170 billion profits of oil and gas giants, which they're expected to make, it's worth remembering. She's a former Shell employee whose party has taken more than £1.5 million in donations from the oil and gas industry since the last election. Aaron, we've sort of known the contours of this energy plan for a while now. That information about Liz Truss's donors, that's new. We only received that on Thursday. How significant do you think that is? Do you think the reason Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng are refusing to put a windfall tax on those energy giants is because of financial links between energy firms and the Tory party, or even Liz Truss's past employment at Shell?
Well, I don't think it's because purely of who funded her leadership campaign. The Conservative Party generally isn't that cheap. The Labour Party is very cheap. You can give them a £5,000 bung, you can get quite a lot done with it. But the Tory Party is quite expensive generally. The reason they have enacted the changes they have, i.e. a huge government intervention, as you said, could be 130 billion over 18 months purely on the price caps for energy. Isn't it interesting, by the way, Michael? For decades, Western countries have been going into the global south with the IMF saying, you can't have price controls. That's bad. It's bad economics. It's bad for the market. If you want to be developed in a high income economy, you can't do it. Sorry, you have to have this IMF adjustment program. No price controls. The second the shit hits the fan in Britain with regards to energy, the most right-wing possible Tory initiates price controls on energy because they know politically if they don't, all hell will break loose. That's an interesting observation, I think. In terms of why they've done it, Michael, on the tax side, so the Labour plan is ostensibly the same, although it's only till Christmas. I find that a bit strange. But let's just say they have the identical plan for the next 18 months, which is a moderately progressive plan. Could be more progressive, it's moderately progressive. And you do what the Tories are saying, but it's entirely funded through increased taxes on fuel companies. You might want to do that as a windfall tax. I don't know how you would do it. But from what we understand, I think over the next 18 months to 2 years, there is talk of circa an extra 150, 160 billion pounds worth of profits for the big energy companies. So it's probably there, right? It's probably there. The Tories haven't done that because they are the political expression and instrument of these precise interests. So in a way, yes, that's why you get people like that funding Liz Truss. That's why people like Liz Truss, before being in politics, work in the in the hydrocarbons sector. But it's not just this quid pro quo transaction in this particular incident. Oh, this is corruption. No, that is the norm of the Conservative Party. And I want to give you an even more obscene example of this, Michael. So there was a major donor in 2014 to the Better Together campaign. I think he gave out £500,000 to it. Now, there is a very interesting connection between this gentleman donating money to that campaign and him getting the rights, and his oil company getting the rights, to drill for oil in Libya in 2014. So the idea that this is an anomaly, or an insidious piece of corruption. I mean, I think it does speak to something which could be described as corruption, but it's deeply systemic. Now, what's really interesting with Liz Truss is that alongside that, I could be wrong, and Kwasi Kwarteng, you have people who are also deeply ideologically wedded to free markets in a way that you haven't really had with Boris Johnson or even David Cameron or George Osborne. These are ideologues who think about political economy and markets, much like Margaret Thatcher. And I think that alongside that enmeshing of interests and the Tories being the political expression of the financial and economic elite, alongside that, I think they genuinely believe that it's actually in the public interest to not tax oil companies on profits. And actually, it's in the common interest of everyone to not do that, because if you don't do that, then they'll have more money and they'll somehow invest it in things, or the incentives to invest it aren't there. That's why we have corporation tax, to incentivize investment. Otherwise, it gets taxed. But anyway, so it's quite complicated with them. I think on the one hand, yes, the Tories are an instrument of the ruling class. On the other, they're ideologues. It's very interesting. We're looking really, I've said this before, arguably the first ideological prime minister since Thatcher. I mean, you could say since Blair, but I think since Thatcher. And that's a really long time, We're looking at 30 years where we haven't had an ideologue in power to this extent. So I think explaining it purely through malevolence and, being deviant, I don't think that's quite right. I think she does believe what she's saying. A bit like Jacob Rees-Mogg too. And this whole hostile takeover we've seen of the Conservative Party by the Britannia Unchained crew.